For the professional data engineer exam with Google, there are obviously lots of different solutions and patterns that you need to know for the exam, but not all of them are equally important. And there's one in particular that is the most likely to show up on the exam in some way by far. And so I'm going to go over what that is right now so that you can have the best chances of answering those questions correctly when they come up. So it starts off with data coming into your GCP environment, and this could really be from anywhere. These could be apps. These could be on-prem databases. These could be IoT devices. Really, any data source from outside of GCP, usually from outside of GCP, coming into your environment. And essentially, the pattern that GCP wants you to know most closely is initially that data being handled by PubSub, right? So PubSub is your managed version of Apache Kafka. It's a message bus. It allows for the ingestion to be handled asynchronously, and for essentially, whatever the next step is after PubSub to be decoupled from the source. So you can have the elements of data that are being ingested into your GCP environment, kind of lined up in a queue in PubSub, and then they can be retrieved either with a push or a pull subscription from whatever comes next, without necessarily that service where it's going to go needing to, be on top of everything. And then the system is a little bit more resilient. It's less likely to fail, and the destination is less likely to get overwhelmed, right? So PubSub is the first stop. And then after PubSub, essentially, we've got Dataflow. And Dataflow is your managed version of Apache Beam. So PubSub is your managed version of Apache Kafka. Dataflow is your managed version of Apache Beam. I'm just going to write that here. Apache Kafka. So these Apache tools are the open source, essentially, big data tools that were developed as big data was becoming a thing. And because they became so popular, it became valuable for companies to also have, from these cloud platforms, managed versions of them where they didn't have to worry about scaling and all that and managing the infrastructure. So with Dataflow, we've got managed version of Apache Beam. And so it can handle batch and streaming data, right? And that's kind of its claim to fame. And so Dataflow is like bread and butter GCP. Google loves to push Dataflow on their exams. They're still pushing PubSub, but a little bit less so. You'll see than they used to. You'll see some solutions even involve just data going straight to Dataflow. And that solution is becoming a little bit more common, but it's still a good practice to have PubSub act as that buffer, as that message bus and buffer between the source and the destination. And in this case, the destination after PubSub is Dataflow. So Dataflow is also where you're going to do most of your transformations of the data. These are called p-transforms, typically. And so especially with large amounts of data, like massive data sets, Dataflow is going to handle the transformations of that data before the data goes to its final destination, which is usually a database. And actually the most common pattern is going to be PubSub to Dataflow to BigQuery. And BigQuery is GCP's data warehouse. It's its, analytics database. We're going to say that this is for relational data. And we're going to say that it's for analytics. So if that's the use case that is mentioned in the question, that's where your data goes, is BigQuery, right? So this is actually the most common, PubSub to Dataflow to BigQuery. However, you could easily send the data someplace else as well. You could send it to cloud storage. And cloud storage is for essentially unstructured data, right? Or just if you want a very cheap place to store the data, then you could send it to cloud storage. That is another pattern. And then the third destination that we'll put up on the board, but again, really you can send your data anywhere after Dataflow, would be Bigtable. And this is a little bit less likely to show up on the exam, but it still has a chance of showing up on the exam more than other services. Dataflow can send data to Bigtable, and this would be essentially non-relational data. And it would be good for time series data, and it's also good for essentially tall and narrow tables, which is essentially what a time series data table is, right? They tend to be tall and narrow. So, Bigtable, cloud storage, and BigQuery, these are the most common destinations after Dataflow. You could send the data to Spanner. You could send the data to Cloud SQL. You could really send the data anywhere or even to multiple locations, after it gets processed with Dataflow. But this is the most common pattern that will show up on the professional data engineer exam in some way. Typically the question will mention something along the lines of they want to, handle the solution with a managed version of Apache Kafka, or they want to handle the solution with something that can handle both batch and streaming data. They want managed services, serverless services. Both of these are serverless. BigQuery is also serverless. And, they'll mention some kind of data source, like, a user-facing application, an on-prem database, IoT devices, logging, something like that. And this is the pattern that if you see this in the answer choices, you should strongly consider picking it. So obviously this is not the only thing that you need to know for the exam by any means, but if you want to kind of get the most out of studying, a small number of things, PubSub to Dataflow to BigQuery is almost certain to show up on the exam in some way. And really this whole kind of common ingestion scenario of PubSub to Dataflow to either BigQuery, cloud storage, or Bigtable, some database or data storage solution on the right here is, very likely to show up on the exam in some way. So I hope that was helpful. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments.